Well, welcome everybody. I'm so blessed that you're here. Thank you so much for coming for Sunday school. We had this 5-week session of Sunday school. We've just kind of looked at odd, mysterious things. And so the first 3 weeks were on the UFOs, and we had that marvelous tape. I thought that was so insightful and so well done. So today will not be anywhere near as good. It's just me. But, we're going to just consider for a moment dinosaurs. So let's open with a word of prayer, shall we? How we thank you, O Lord, that you created all things. And the things you have made are wondrous and in some cases mysterious to us. But we trace them all back to your hand. For you are great, you are mighty, and yet you have also made us and made us a little lower than the angels and given us authority to rule over your creation and to manage it for you. And so we praise you that you have entrusted so much to us. Help us to do this wisely. Give us insight and wisdom as we seek, Lord, to understand the world you have created, and help us, like so many Christians before us, as we study the marvelous portrait of the master painter, to discern in your brush strokes your genius and your glory. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay. So when I was a little kid, I don't know how small, I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6, but for Christmas, I got a book on dinosaurs. And I just found that so fascinating. I wish I still had that. I have most of my old books from when I was a kid. I can't find that one, but I probably wore it out because I read that book all the time. Do you know any kids that don't love dinosaurs? No? Okay. It's the coolest thing. They're so marvelous, aren't they? And yet for kids growing up today, there are different narratives going out there about the source of dinosaurs, what they were, when they were, how they were, and that creates a challenge for kids. So you bring them to church, and they go to Sunday school, and they hear stories about Jesus giving sight to the blind man and raising the lame man, and God making everything. And then they go to school, and they are told in a very officious, scientific-sounding way by authority figures that the earth is millions of years old, and those things lived a long time ago, and they conclude that mom and dad are just kind of following this group of stories that makes them feel better but aren't really true, and they get to high school and college and they drop off from the church. They quit coming. Is that a familiar story?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think is really important is emphasizing to the kids as they grow up the reality of what God has created. And thankfully, we have things like Answers in Genesis and the Creation Research Institute and dozens and dozens of organizations like that didn't exist in our grandparents' day and age, to help us break through and see what the truth of a lot of these things are. So dinosaurs are said to have existed between 65 million and about 245 million years ago, somewhere in those ages. What for us as Christians would lead us to conclude that can't possibly be right? What would be the biggest reason why they couldn't have existed long before the first man and woman during all of those ages? There might be more than one reason, but I'm looking for one in particular that to me is like the nuclear missile. This shatters the whole thing for us as Christians.
Adam was created on the 7th day, and all of those other things came up, and then Adam in 1 week.
Okay, so...
And so the timeline of the man, Adam, till now couldn't possibly be millions of years.
Yeah, so Adam was created on the sixth
Sixth day.
day.
Yes.
And so it doesn't fit the timeline. And I think you're getting close to what I'm hinting at. In order for all of those dinosaurs to have existed before Adam, before the existence of the first man and woman, what would have had to have existed?
Heaven and earth.
Heaven and earth. There's one thing in particular that I'm looking for.
Land.
All right, let's open up to Genesis.
Okay.
Genesis chapter 3. And let's just look for a moment at verse 3. Would someone read that? Genesis 3, verse 3.
But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die."
Okay, and then let's skip over to chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. Was there a volunteer that would read verses 17 and 18?
And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field.
All right, so with the sin of Adam and Eve, something changed in creation that did not exist before. What was different? Sin, certainly, but the result or consequence of sin. Death, right. Death and decay, thorns and thistles, breakdown, destruction, and death. If Adam and Eve had not sinned in the Garden of Eden, how long would they have lived?
Forever.
Forever. And how long would the animals have lived?
Forever.
Forever. There was no death before sin. Sin brought death, and the New Testament teaches that very clearly as well. Death is a result of sin. So, before Adam and Eve existed, if dinosaurs and other creatures existed before that, and they evolved, they changed over time by certain ones dying off and certain ones that were by evolution better qualified to live, what would have had to have happened? They would have had to have died. So there was no death before Adam and Eve sinned. So evolution teaches that things evolved or got better over time by long series of creatures dying. And then you have survival of the fittest. The fittest creatures survive. And the unfit creatures die. So death would have had to have existed before sin. And we as Christians believe there was no death before sin. So the evolutionary story, is that acceptable to us as Christians on theological grounds? No, we can't accept that. Well, what about on scientific grounds? Well, that's where the debate lies, isn't it? And it's one of those debates where if you're on the wrong side, you don't get your position isn't heard, right? It's not that you're wrong, it's that nobody will let you tell your story if you don't believe the right thing. We do not live in a free and open society, and the scientific community is not free and open. Please don't ever think that they are. Many individuals are within, but don't suspect that they are. Did anyone go to the family movie night that we did 2 years ago when we had the Ben Stein movie? Was anybody here for that? Do you remember that? If that was not conclusive evidence that if you take the wrong view, you will be shunned. Run out. You lose you don't get tenure in universities, you're not allowed to publish, you're rejected. In other words, there's one official established view, no other views are allowed. That was the whole point of the movie, which he clearly showed. Well, we're so blessed to have organizations today that are looking at this and help us understand this from a Christian perspective. So, if we take the Bible at its word, that God created all the creatures, God would then have created all of the dinosaurs. So, where did the dinosaurs go? What happened to them? Yeah, the flood. So we'll take a brief look at that for a moment. So let's go back again to Genesis chapter 1. And let's go to verse 6. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And in verse 6 there, where it uses the word expanse, do you see the little footnote if you're using these ESVs? Do you see that? Okay, what does the footnote say?
Canopy.
Yeah, or a canopy. Or I think the old English word there is a firmament. So, now, not all Christian creation scientists believe this. This is disputed and argued about. So I'm not offering this as something conclusive that you have to believe it. But it's one plausible explanation that makes a lot of sense to me. That when God created the world did not look the way it looks to us. There were many things that were very, very different, including the possibility that there may have been a canopy or a firmament around the world. So if we were to go up right now, what would we find? We would go through atmosphere of decreasing density, right, until we reach space, where the atmosphere is gone. You just keep going up. But what if there was a canopy all the way around the world? Like some say it could have been like a vapor shield, water. Some say it could have been like a shield of ice. And so the theorists, the Christians that believe that, when they talk about it, it's very interesting. If we had this shield of ice all the way around the world, what would that do? Well, one thing it would do is it would contain the atmosphere. Right now, what is the state of our atmosphere? Well, the closer you get to Earth, because of gravity, the denser the atmosphere is, right? The higher you go, the less dense the atmosphere is. Well, if you contained all of that in one container, it would equalize things. What you would do is you would equalize the pressures. So, right now, when we have storms, things like hurricanes or tornadoes or storm fronts come. Who was saying they got bad lightning? Like Geneva last night?
Yeah.
Thundering away?
Yeah.
What causes weather? What causes that? I'm not a meteorologist, but weather's caused by areas of lower pressure and higher pressure, right? It forces things to move, or forces air and currents to move around the earth. That's what causes weather. Well, what if it was all the same pressure? You'd have no weather changes, no storms. Everything would be the same. So up in Greenland or Siberia, instead of snow or cold, what would it be like?
Jungle.
It'd be tropical, right? You'd find
Antarctica.
green plants. Would there be hurricanes or would there be tornadoes? It would all be equalized. In other words, the earth, when it was first created, may very well have been a true paradise. We read in the Bible about how people lived a long time before the flood, like Methuselah. What did Methuselah live? Did anyone remember? 900
years, was it?
900 and something. Does anyone remember? 932? Well, 916?
That was it, a long time.
Yeah, people say, well, how did people live so long back in that day? Well, you would have had equalized pressure. In some ways, be like being in a hyperbaric chamber, right? People today who are sick sometimes go in those because they can be healthy. You wouldn't have had dangerous radiation from the sun. The ice shield is filtering out dangerous radiations. Things that cause diseases and stuff like that. You would have less of that because you're in a pressurized zone. You'd have tropical vegetation likely all around the world. So the earth would have truly been like a paradise. Now I don't know this for sure, but this is one plausible answer that some Christians have given. So what happened when Noah's flood took place? Did it just, we've all been through downpours, right? It's raining, you think, boy, oh boy, this is like Noah's flood, the water's just coming down. Was it like that? No, it was tremendous upheaval. It says that water actually came up from the ground too. So today we have oceans and we have mountains and we have all these different elevations. But very likely what caused a lot of that is upheaval in the planet, things pushing the planet, or pushing the continental shelves up. And also this ice shield, if this all falls apart and breaks and shatters and falls to the ground, you have this huge deluge. And so it was entirely destructive, killed everything on the planet, right, except for the fish and the animals that were in Noah's ark. But when Noah and his family gets off the ark, what would be different? Everything. Instead of coming out and experiencing that pressurized chamber and maybe like the glow of even light coming through the ice shield, it would be like now, you'd see blue skies and sunlight beating down. And what would have happened after Noah's flood? You have oceans that have formed, you have mountains now that have formed, you have areas of the earth that now become engulfed in ice, we have ice ages, we have other areas of the world that become superheated, they become deserts, so everything changes. So if Noah had taken 2 of every animal on the ark, and he had taken 2 of every kind of dinosaur with him on the ark, then what would have happened to all the other dinosaurs? They would have drowned, right? Except for the water ones. But the animals that were on the ark would have been like all the rest of the animals, the ones that would repopulate the earth. This, again, it seems plausible to me because when we find dinosaurs today, how are we finding them? What's the... Yeah, it's fossils, right? They're covered in sedimentation. And again, the evolutionary theory is that this happened, that these coverings of sedimentation took place over many, many years, an inch forms, and then a millimeter forms, and it just takes millions of years for this to form. But what do we know now, really, about how things like that form? They happen very quickly during some kind of catastrophe. So like I think when we did the video series, do you remember they talked about Mount St. Helens?
Yep.
How drastically and dramatically that changed the landscape just like that. And so things get covered in this sedimentation. That's how the fossils form. Oh, I want to make a note of this too because I thought this was interesting. This was also part of the video series that we saw, but it just so happened that somebody from the Midwest Creation Fellowship that we went to a few months ago talked particularly about this. Soft tissue in the dinosaurs. So not only have others found this, but that guy that talked to us from I think from the Creation Research Institute, he took a team of people, wasn't it to North Dakota or Montana or something like that? And they did a dig looking for dinosaur fossils, and they found bones, and inside the bone was soft tissue. In other words, it wasn't all fossilized yet. It was still, you could stretch it. It was still soft. Why wouldn't that have decayed and dissolved, or why wouldn't it have fossilized over that long period of time? And that speaker explained to us, and he got deep into the science, way deeper than I'm capable of going, how under certain types of conditions that could be possible for up to maybe like 15,000 years. But there is no cartilage or arteries or anything like that in any animal that could last for 64 million years. It would all be long decay. It can't be. So that's evidence that they can't be that old. But they would have been covered over by all of this sediment. And so the dinosaurs would have exited Noah's Ark just like all the other animals, and like all the other animals would have had to repopulate around the world. But the conditions would have been very different. So dinosaurs, for example, that eat lots of vegetation, after Noah's Ark, Noah's flood, what did they have to eat? Yeah, it took a long time for vegetation to grow back, and there were huge areas of the world where maybe it wouldn't grow back or didn't grow back. So they just didn't repopulate as well, and it took them longer to spread. And then over time, more and more of them died out until eventually they were gone. But that would explain why there are so many stories in every culture. Every culture in the world has all these stories about people who have seen what they call dragons, or flying dragons, or great reptiles. So they would have existed, but there just would have been fewer and fewer of them over time until they were all gone. Let me show you an interesting picture here. This is kind of fascinating, I think. I don't know if you can see that. This is a picture from a Japanese fishing boat in the Pacific in 1977. And in their nets, they caught some kind of a dead animal under the ocean. And they pulled it up, and they guessed it had probably been dead for at least a month. So it's rotting. The flesh is like literally falling off the bones. It's rotting, and it stunk terribly. And so they dropped it back in the water. But they've got pictures of it. You see what you look what you see there. Could this be like the head, droop down, and the neck, and the back, and the body, and the long flippers of something like a plesiosaur? That's 1977. If that's not what it is, well, what do you think it is? I mean, there are a lot of things we don't know. So there's interesting stories about all of this stuff. But that also means then that at least until they started to become very rare and eventually extinct, early on in human history, after Noah's flood, people still would have had some kind of run-ins or contacts with dinosaurs, wouldn't they? So let's take a look at a couple of those, possibly. We don't know, but you can judge for yourself. So let's go to the book of Job. The book of Job. Right before the Psalms. If you flip your Bible open to the middle, more than likely you're going to be in the Psalms. And Job is the book right before that. We'll go to chapter 40.
Never noticed.
Now, while you're looking that up, an interesting thing about the background of Job. When did Job live? I don't know if anyone's entirely sure, but most scholars consider the book of Job possibly to be the oldest book in the Bible. So who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible? A little trivia test.
Moses.
Yeah, good. And Moses would have lived roughly, it would have been about 1500 BC, so 3,500 years ago. It's thought by scholars that Job dates back to the time of Abraham, which would have been at least 2000 BC. So at least 4,000 years ago. So this is old. It's going way back. And if you open to chapter 40, let's take a look at chapter 40, Job 40. One day we'll do a more detailed study of Job.
Yeah, be a good one.
Yeah, it's a fascinating book. But in chapter 40, what's going on is that earlier in the book, Job has complained to God. Remember all the bad things that happened to Job? And Job has kind of said, I think God owes me an explanation. I don't deserve this. And his friends, what was the problem? All his friends are going, you must deserve it. You must have sinned. There's no reason this would have happened to you unless you did something wrong. And were his friends correct in that? No. God reproves his friends. The worst thing you can do when somebody's suffering is say, well, you've got to come and somehow you deserve that. That is not a comfort to people. But especially in Job's case, it was not true. Sometimes we just don't know. In Job's case, it was not true. But Job also kind of crossed the line because Job is telling God, God, you need to explain to me what this is all about. I didn't deserve this. And finally, God shows up. And remember the last few chapters here, what's God's answer to Job? That's right. I'm God. I don't owe you anything. And he goes through all this stuff. Where were you when I created the world? Where were you when, who are you compared to me, right? And so we have these two interesting stories here then as part of it in chapters 40 and 41. So look at chapter 40, verse 15. Verse 15. He's calling Job's attention to things that he has made, to show how God's creation is so awesome and tremendous. So verse 15, behold behemoth, or behemoth, I think probably would be my guess. Behold behemoth. Now, what is behemoth? You see a footnote there? Does anyone see the footnote?
Yep.
Large animal.
Large animal.
Yeah, large animal.
Unknown.
Exact identity, unknown. We don't know what this is, right? So let's look at the description of it, as God describes it. Let's look at the description. And maybe before we do that, let's just note this too. If God is telling Job, look at such and such an animal that I created to show you how great I am. Look at how powerful and big this animal is. Show you how me as a creator, I'm great. But if it wasn't a real animal, would the argument still make any sense? So, for example, let's pick something that doesn't really exist. How about Superman? So, can I pick on you, Jim? Suppose Jim is trying to make an object lesson to his kids and say, you kids need to listen to me when I tell you stuff, because I'm friends with Superman. And Superman listens to me when I tell him things. Why don't you listen to me when I tell him things? He could be telling a story. It could be imaginary. But does it have any force? No. If you're the kids, you know there's no Superman, so you know that that's not true. It has to be real in order for the argument to work, right? It's the same here. If there's no such thing as this animal that God is describing to Job, and if Job has never actually personally even seen one, then the argument makes no sense. It's not real. So this has to be a real animal, and it has to be an animal that Job has seen. what animal is this? Verse 15, behold behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. So what does this big animal do? It's a vegetarian. It's grass. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. Okay, what's a cedar?
Tree.
A tree. So whatever animal this is, what is his tail like? Like a tree. All right. So some people have thought, well, maybe this is an elephant because he's describing something really big that eats grass, right? Could this be an elephant?
No.
No. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. So where does this animal go? It goes in the mountains. But now also look at verse 21. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. So where else does this animal go? In water. Oh, very interesting. And lotus leaves, is that like in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the ocean? Where would that be?
Short, marsh.
Yeah, in the shallow waters, right? For his shade, the lotus trees cover him, the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He's confident, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. So he's big enough that if the river starts getting really restless, does he worry about it? No, he's big. So could he be like a water buffalo or something like that? No, in a big flood, we've seen that where big, huge, sweeping currents wash some of the water buffaloes away and they drown. So this thing has to be really big, right? Can one take him by his eyes or pierce his nose with a snare? So is it something that you can capture or kill? It's too big for that. By the way, how would Noah have gotten something this big on the ark in the first place then?
A lot of work.
A lot of work. A lot of work.
Took babies.
Yeah, take smaller ones. Here's the interesting thing about reptiles. What's the full size of a reptile?
As big as a container.
Amanda.
If this animal could swim, would it get drowned in the flood? Would it not need to go on the ark if it could swim?
It would need to go on the ark, yes. Yeah. So the interesting thing about reptiles is the older they get, the more they keep growing. In other words, when do they stop growing? They never stop growing. So I remember even as a kid going to Brookfield Zoo, and they had, I can't remember his name. What was his name? There was one of those giant alligator snapping turtles there. Did anyone see that when they were a kid? The giant alligator snapping turtle at Brookfield Zoo? I mean, he was huge. And it was so cool because you'd go and they had him in his own container and he had green algae growing on him because he basically didn't move. He just sat there and they put little fish in there. And I guess when he got hungry, he would open his mouth and when a fish come by, he'd grab it. But otherwise, he just sat there. All the times I saw him, I never even saw him breathe or come out of the water. He just sat there. But he was huge. And he was like 100 years old or something like that. The turtle lived 100 years. They just keep growing. So dinosaurs were not always large. They may have been smaller, but some of them just kept growing until they were bigger. And many kinds of dinosaurs were not large. But this one that he's talking about to Job is huge. Now look at chapter 41. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? So here's another creature that's mentioned, Leviathan. What's a Leviathan? Yeah, you're looking at the footnote this time. You're ahead of me. Yeah, large sea animal, exact identity unknown. So whatever this is, it's really big, but again, we're not sure. But can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you with soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you put him on a leash for your girls? Wouldn't that be something? Here, honey, I got you a pet Leviathan. Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle, you will not do it again. Behold, the hope of a man is false. He goes on to talk more about the Leviathan. He talks about the shields on his back, like that he has large scales or something on his back. So again, what's the Leviathan? I don't know if we really know, but he's describing something that sounds an awful lot like it could be one of these dinosaurs, couldn't it? So it makes sense to think that dinosaurs are not millions and millions of years old, but just a few thousand years old, just like the rest of the earth, but that they died off. And the more you learn about this, the more it makes sense. So it's not my area of expertise, but if you have an interest in this and you enjoy it and you're inclined towards it, there's so much you could study and learn, and I would encourage you to do that. And I would also encourage you to do something else. So for your kids and your grandkids, I'm speaking especially to you parents and grandparents now, when your kids get interested in dinosaurs, there's all kinds of marvelous books out there by creation-oriented organizations that talk about dinosaurs. They have the same pictures, they show the same fossils, but they're open to the idea that God created the dinosaurs. They didn't evolve over millions and millions of years. So look for those kinds of books and get those as gifts for your kids. So your kids from early on are getting the right story. What they hear, a lot of times what they hear first is what they believe. Isn't that how we all are? So you want them to hear first the truth. And it's fun to see even young kids get equipped to ask questions that evolutionists have a really hard time answering. So that's my encouragement to everybody. We're out of time, but I hope that this was a little bit fun and at least presented to you the pathways toward learning more about some of this. Next week, we're going to look at ghosts and spirits, and we'll consider that a little bit, something else that's mysterious that we want to try to put in a biblical perspective. Well, thank you, Lord, for gathering us together. Watch over each of us and keep us in the grace of Christ. Amen. Thanks, everybody.